Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Pennsylvania's gun law is our topic today. You can join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001, or you can text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by DeJesus from Pennlive and the Patriot News. A small Pennsylvania borough might change its marijuana laws. What's happening?
Good morning, Larry. Yeah, so it's North York Borough in York County, a very small borough, about 2,200 people, has a proposal on the table. The council in March is going to consider and vote on a measure that would decriminalize possession of small amounts of marijuana.
And what does that mean, decriminalize, for the person who has the possession of marijuana? If it's decriminalized, just what does that mean for them?
Well, currently, it's a third-degree misdemeanor if you're caught with a small possession of marijuana, and you could face 30 days in prison, a $500 fine. If there is a traffic violation, you could also lose your license. So the idea is, as the borough manager told me, is not to encourage people to do marijuana, obviously, but to really address the disproportionate adverse impact on Black and brown communities in particular, but also just a lot of lives, in particularly young people, that are impacted by these small violations. And so, if you're a college student, suddenly you lose your license, and suddenly you can't get to work, you can't get to school, and so on and so on. So that is the thinking. Their thinking is to just make it not a misdemeanor, but and there are proposals, I think, in the legislature as well, that would just make it a summary offense. So that's their thinking. They'd be joining already. We have Lancaster, York, Harrisburg, and Abbottstown that have already ratified these measures to criminalize small amounts.
Which way is public opinion leaning on marijuana possession in general?
Well, increasingly, and there was just a Gallup poll in November that showed that the majority of Americans, and I think it's something quite hefty. I know I had it in my story. I think it's about 60-something, 68. People surveyed favored decriminalizing, small possessions of marijuana. So, and that's even so in the legislature, and even among, the Republican Party, there seems to be a shift towards opening up to this idea of sort of relaxing some of these laws that have been in place for a long time, and really, as I said, disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities.
So what's going to be happening at the meeting when they eventually take up this matter, and what has to happen in order for this to go through?
The vote is on March 12th, and I believe, I should know this, but I don't, but I believe, it's the majority of the vote. Majority of the Borough Council will be voting on this. We'll be waiting to see what happens on March the 12th.
Now, which lawmakers on the state level are supporting marijuana legalization? We know that the idea in general is nothing new, and of course, Governor Shapiro called for the legalization of recreational marijuana during his budget speech recently.
Correct. Senator Sharif Street has for a long time, a Democrat from Philadelphia, has for a long time been a supporter of decriminalizing and legalization of marijuana. And he's now joined by, a Republican counterpart, Senator Bartolotta, but also across both the aisle for different measures, for different ways of relaxing the laws. We're seeing an increasing sort of acceptance and willingness to consider and discuss decriminalization.
Now,
So it is gaining some support.
The borough manager in North York, how is he justifying this decision? I imagine he's getting some feedback from the community in the wake of this announcement that they may legalize possession of a small amount of marijuana.
He made it sound, when I spoke to him last week, he made it sound as if a lot of the residents that he has spoken to, even though they may have very conservative views about marijuana and drug use and whatnot, are in favor of this idea because the parameters are very narrow, where we're talking about small possessions, and it doesn't go beyond the idea of let's say, I don't know, a large amount of marijuana. I don't know what that is, but it is within that confine, that very strict, narrow definition of a small amount. And I think a lot of the residents have told him that they see the impact that, particularly among the young people, if they're stopped, if they're caught with a small amount, let's say 1 or 2 joints or something, it could impact their future, their immediate future for certain. And I just think the public opinion, that's where public opinion seems to be going. And so the folks over at North York are proceeding with, and David Bolton, the manager, told me that they have appealed to state and federal policymakers for the past year or so. They've sent letters. They've, have reached out to lawmakers to say, hey, could you do something about this? And he basically said no one ever got back to them. So they decided, hey, we'll just take, they looked around and they saw other municipalities are doing this, and there are dozens of states. I think 21 states have decriminalized legal possession of and recreational use. So I just think that that's where the wave is at the moment.
E.V. DeJesus of Pennlive and the Patriot News, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Larry.
More PCN Capitol Preview after a short break. Welcome back. Our guests are Representative Aaron Bernstine, Republican from Butler and Lawrence counties, and Representative Chris Rabb, Democrat from Philadelphia. Representative Rabb, we'll start with you. How big a problem is gun violence in your district?
Oh, it's a problem. It's significant. There's rarely a month where there's not someone dying from firearms. It's a crisis. It's a public health crisis, and not just in my district. It's worse in other parts of Philadelphia, but there are also counties across the Commonwealth with high rates of homicide by gun, most of them self-inflicted. So we're really talking about older men in suburban and rural areas who kill themselves with firearms. So this is an issue that transcends urbanity.
Representative Bernstine, what are your concerns about gun violence in your district?
Well, one of the greatest things that we've seen, not only in Western Pennsylvania and not only across the Commonwealth as a whole, but also across the country, is the vast majority of these crimes that are committed with firearms, are crimes that are actually committed with firearms that are stolen, firearms that are illegal, individuals that should not be having firearms in the first place. And one of the things that I think we need to be very concerned about is that we are not taking the rights away from law-abiding citizens. Oftentimes, these gun control bills, what are passed by the Democrat House of Representatives and the governor has been proposing, are pieces of legislation that would only harm law-abiding citizens. We need to make sure that we're focusing on the actual criminals that are committing these acts.
The House... Go ahead, Representative Rabb. I hear you.
Oh, I didn't say anything.
Oh, sorry. I was positive you spoke. Well, let's talk about the main reason we have you here today, gentlemen. And the House Judiciary Committee passed several bills designed to reduce gun violence. So let's try to talk about them one by one. And one has to do with mental health reports. The argument is often made that current gun laws are sufficient, but we need more emphasis on the mental health component of gun ownership. How was that addressed in these bills recently approved by the Judiciary Committee?
Well, when there is a belief that someone may harm themselves or others in their home, um, uh, there is legislation to say that there can be intervention where those guns are temporarily removed from that home to keep the gun owner safe and the people in that household.
And you're talking about red flag laws.
Yes.
So I think what we've really seen through this process is as follows. Absolutely, we want to be making sure that people are not committing crimes with firearms. But one of the things that we've seen across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is this, is people are able to make an accusation and then the individuals have their firearms removed from them with no due process. We need to make sure that there's a due process in place and that people can't just dramatically pick up the phone, accuse someone of something, and they have their firearms removed. Our article, our Second Amendment rights are very important. And Article 1, Section 21 specifically states that the right to bear arms shall not be questioned in the Pennsylvania Constitution. So we need to be making sure that we're protecting law-abiding citizens while also ensuring that we're keeping public safety at hand.
So who ultimately would make the decision to take the gun away from the person who could hurt himself or someone else? It sounds like a judge has to do it, right?
Correct, but they're working with law enforcement too. And the irony of this conversation around firearms is that oftentimes it's the conservatives who are saying, we need to respect law enforcement. We need to comply so that we do not have issues with regard to when we talk about police accountability or abuses by law enforcement. But when law enforcement specifically asked the legislature for help because they're being outgunned on the street, there's deafening silence in Harrisburg. Law enforcement are the ones who are on the front lines who have to protect and serve. And so they need more tools, and those tools are not given to them because for 12 years, Republicans in the House have refused to introduce any bills that would actually keep us safer. And when we talk about our state constitution, we also have to talk about a provision, I forget which article, I'm sure Rep. Bernstine might be able to help me with this, but the one that talks about protecting our liberties and our freedom from violence. How do we have public safety? How do we have community safety that is, I believe, something that should be protected and can be interpreted by our state constitution as providing for the type of safety that everyone deserves wherever they live across the Commonwealth. So we have a Heller case in 2008, Supreme Court, that says there are reasonable limits to gun ownership. And how do we define reasonable in our state legislature if we all believe that we should all be safe? Because what we have found is that there are plenty of well-trained, law-abiding firearms owners who are not protecting everybody else, whether that's in law enforcement or private citizens. We saw that in Kansas City. There are 800 people who are law-abiding gun owners who were not able to protect those people in ways that prevented loss of life. So what are we prepared to do to keep Pennsylvanians safe? We have to, while we have rights, we also have responsibilities. And I know that that's a strong conservative talking point. Personal responsibility. What is our responsibility to keep each other safe?
Well, I think to that point, and I think this is so important where, Representative Rabb and I, we were talking a little bit before this. We're actually very good friends. I would say Representative Rabb represents the left side of the Democrat Party. I'm clearly on the right side of the Republican Party. But rather than that, we're still able to engage in meaningful dialogue and conversation. And first and foremost, I think we need more of that across our political environment. Number two, this is an example of how one side views something and the other side views the same issue differently. I personally believe, and I have advocated for, and we have worked in the legislature when the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives on a very important issues such as mandatory minimums, on things such as Markey's Law that ensured that when people committed violent acts in prison, that they would stay in prison. Now, the truth is that individuals that are getting out and committing these acts of violence are people that are not productive members of society. They are dangerous members of society. Representative Rabb and his side, excuse me, believe that we should be restricting firearms in a different manner. My view is this, that these individuals should not be on the street. And when you commit a crime, specifically, by the way, a crime with a firearm, there should be absolute and extreme penalties for that type of behavior.
I want to remind viewers you can call our program for about the next 30 minutes. We'll be taking your calls and your texts. Let me give you the phone number, 1-877-PA6-5001. Or if you want to text us at 717-219-4001. Gentlemen, I want to try to focus on the bills that were recently approved by the House Judiciary Committee. And one did have to do with mental health reports, and the goal of the bill was to speed them up. So what kinds of problems have been caused by mental health reports being too slow?
I can't speak to the specifics of that particular bill. One of the reasons I say that is because the Judiciary Committee is one of the most active committees of the 24 or so standing committees in the House of Representatives. There has been a whirlwind pace of legislation being pushed through. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that in the previous leadership of the Judiciary Committee has refused to run about 99% of bills introduced by Democrats. And I'm glad that despite the extraordinary progress of the Judiciary Committee in this past year, we have also chosen to run Republican bills. I think it just because Democrats are in the majority does not mean that we get to decide everything. And I think there has to be some parity. So with every Judiciary Committee meeting, there's always at least one Republican bill, I believe, since I've been on this committee thus far. As it relates to your previous question, I think there's bureaucracy that stands in the way of what could protect folks when we talk about mental illness. And the reality, and I have to keep going back to this point, the majority of deaths by firearm are committed by law-abiding Pennsylvanians. It is not the rogues on the street who are part of gangs and running around shooting people. That is a serious, serious issue. But the reality is, it's most people who are responsible firearm owners until they're not, until they choose to use it against themselves or someone in their homes. The statistics bear that out. This is not a political point. This is a matter of fact. And if you look at the high levels of death by gun in counties across the state, including Lawrence County, which is higher than I thought, it's not because of folks on the street. It's people in their homes who are law-abiding citizens. Let's remember that Kyle Rittenhouse was a law-abiding citizen. All right. So when we're talking about the bad guys, this is not so much about blame. It's about impact, and the impact of folks using their own guns or not storing them properly, and a child comes upon them. They were law-abiding until they weren't. And I think that's a very important distinction that a lot of people don't lift up. And, you know, if we want to punish people who make really bad decisions, like trying to buy a gun when they have a felony, right? We have a lot of support around that in Harrisburg. But what about someone who recklessly keeps a firearm unlocked and available for a child, and that child plays with it and kills themselves? Why does that adult get a pass? So
Representative Bernstine, I want to give you a chance. Any comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things. Number one, I think Representative Rabb is also talking about suicides and death by gun by themselves. Okay. So I think when you lump those in with other crimes that are committed with firearms, number one, I'm not so sure that's fair, because if individuals are going to make that choice, they're going to make that decision whether or not that they have a firearm available to them or not. The other thing is this. He talked about that they are law-abiding citizens until they're not. Well, listen, I don't speed until I do. That doesn't mean that a police officer should be able to come and confiscate my car. I think that those are very, very different situations that we have to deal with. And the last thing is this. We have the right to defend ourselves. We have the right to have firearms in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If the Democrats don't want that to be the case, then they can go ahead and they should make a constitutional change and go to the voters and say, hey, should you have the right to bear arms? And if the voters say no, then that's one thing, right? But ultimately, here's what I've seen. The Democrat Party and those on the left have consistently, time and time again, tried to pass gun bills, anti-gun bills, anti-Second Amendment bills. These pieces of legislation that they've tried to pass and sometimes do pass, number one, they don't even have the support of the entire House of Representatives, the vast majority of them, which the Democrats hold which the Democrats hold a one-seat majority of. But on top of that, they only ultimately impact those that abide by the law. Lawbreakers are going to consistently be lawbreakers, and regardless of what Representative Rabb or I passed, they're going to continue to break that law. So you shouldn't be passing laws that infringe rights upon those that are law-abiding citizens, with the projection that they may at some point not be.
So what about the future of assault weapons? That's been discussed lately in the legislature, and I believe the Judiciary Committee approved a bill along those lines. What's happening?
Yeah, so they did approve a bill along those lines. And what I've seen with and I'm not putting in quotations here, assault weapons is this. Just because a firearm looks a certain way does not mean that it is an assault weapon, okay? I don't even know, first off, there's no real definition of assault weapon.
Well, it's a rapid fire weapon, right?
Well, a rapid fire weapon would mean that you pull the trigger and then it shoots multiple bullets at one time. That is not, those are already illegal here in the United States of America, as well as in Pennsylvania. It is one pull of a trigger for one shot. That is no different than a firearm that people carry on their hip, oftentimes, which is a semi-automatic. These just happen to be semi-automatic rifles. This is another example of the left trying to infringe upon our Second Amendment rights.
The irony of that argument is that when the Second Amendment was passed, there were no bullets. There were no bullets. There were muskets. You had gunpowder. Bullets did not exist. When we talk about the Second Amendment, we never talk about a well-established militia. That clause always seems to fall out of the conversation. It was because we didn't want to have a standing army because we had just gone through the Revolutionary War and we were afraid of that type of militarism. So this was also before the existence of police forces. So the militia was between a standing army, which the founders didn't want, and the creation of police forces, which didn't happen for like 100 years thereafter. So in the historical context of what we're talking about, the Second Amendment was really for those members of militia. It wasn't for the average person. And we have, even in a conservative court, said there should be restrictions on gun rights. And I think that's reasonable. I don't know if Aaron Bernstine would agree that people should be walking around with bazookas. Do you think, I mean, it's a weapon. So is that okay? Like, where does it end?
Try to answer that, Representative Bernstine.
Sure. So a couple of things. Number one, the courts have previously established that the Second Amendment does provide individual rights to own firearms. Okay, so that is the courts have already decided that. They've made that decision. That has been standing policy in the United States literally since the Second Amendment was introduced. But what we're talking about is this. We're talking about just because a gun looks like something that we're going to ban it. Okay, AR-15s are not weapons of war. If you put military soldiers overseas with AR-15s that are sold at the local gun store down the road, they would not end well for our American military heroes. That is not what we're talking about. First off, the guns that are already have bursts, or you hold it and it shoots rapid fire, usually it's 2 or 3 on burst, they are already illegal. Just because something looks like something doesn't mean that you should ban it. And I think that that's what we have. We have a situation where it's politically advantageous to look at something and say, geez, that looks big and scary, but it truly isn't any different than a firearm that you carry on your hip.
But were the firearms used by Kyle Rittenhouse, were they not big and scary?
Listen, it was a regular AR-15, and what I would say about Kyle Rittenhouse, if I could, Representative, what I would say about Kyle Rittenhouse is this. He was viciously attacked by individuals. Number one, the one guy was a pedophile. The other guy should have been in jail and never got out of jail. But the left in those particular places allow these people out of jail. He was viciously attacked, and he was found not guilty by a jury. So that's
I was talking about his gun, though. I was talking about his firearm. Was that not a high-powered weapon?
Well, what I would say is I'm very happy that Kyle Rittenhouse had that weapon when he was viciously attacked by those that have previously broken the law.
Isn't that the job of law enforcement? He carried that across state lines as a minor. So I'm curious.
So of course, in that regard, he absolutely should have been held accountable, right?
But he wasn't, right?
But that would have to do with the prosecutor. So the prosecutor,
right. I guess my point is, here you have a child with a big scary weapon, right? That he killed people with, right? And no, should he be able to protect himself? Yeah, we should all have those protections. That's why we have law enforcement. I mean, for all my conservatives who believe in law enforcement, that's their job, right?
Chris, they're 45 minutes to my house. Okay.
What's that?
Like law enforcement for you, just knowing the difference. And I think this is actually important for the people out here to understand. Okay. The difference in districts, and you and I have had these conversations often, right? You can look out your window at your home and see law enforcement, right? They're literally quite a while ago, somebody broke into my home. It was 40 minutes before the police got to my house. Okay. 40 minutes. There's a significant difference, I think, also to a lot of our points that we've talked about before off of this subject, that districts are different and districts have different needs. Okay.
Exactly.
That being said, I think it's important for people to have the right to protect themselves. And I would share this with you, that if my home was broken into, a call to 911 is an absolute joke, right? They're literally 40 minutes. Number one, they could get rid of my family, take every single thing out of my house, load it in a tray 25 minutes down the road before the police even begin to show up.
And I think
one
your
more,
point is
Representative Rabb, try to wrap this up in 30 seconds, then we're going to move on to something else. Go ahead.
The representative makes an excellent point. What works in rural communities may not work in urban communities, but we have a statute that does not allow local control and local sovereignty, which is a conservative talking point. So I believe we should have ordinances and we should have freedoms for different communities around the Commonwealth to do what's best for their safety in their area. What works for Philly is not going to work for Lawrence County necessarily. And I think that's something that we should free our counties to do. And also, Kyle Rittenhouse didn't protect himself in his own home, right? So he crossed state lines illegally with the firearm through the help of his mother.
Representatives, I have to interrupt Representative Rabb. Representatives Aaron Bernstine and Chris Rabb, we have to pause for a minute because we're going to take a break for a minute while we look at program notes for PCN. On Wednesday, On the Issues has candidates running in April's primary election. First at 6 p.m., Craig Williams for PA Attorney General. Then at 6:30, Malcolm Kenyatta for Auditor General. At 7 o'clock, Mark Pinsley, also for Auditor General. Then at 7:30, Rick Copeland. He's running for Congress in District 10. That's tomorrow evening. On Journalist Roundtable, the guests will be Stephen Caruso from Spotlight PA, John Finnerty from CapitolWire.com, and Linda Stein from the Delaware Valley Journal. They'll be here on Thursday at 6 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN continue to bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. All right, gentlemen, we were talking about assault weapons there a minute ago, and there seemed to be some confusion as to what constitutes an assault weapon. So perhaps I can clear it up with our next subject, which has to do with rapid-fire weapons. These are called bump stocks, and there's a bill that would ban bump stocks. Who wants to refresh me on what that is?
Well, I will defer to Rep. Bernstine. He is clearly the gun enthusiast. And I have no problem deferring to his expertise. But if I may, I just want to finish my point before the break, if I may. What I was saying is when Rep. Bernstine was talking about being able to protect one's family, one's home, one's property, I agree 100%. I have no problem with that. When you're talking about your own home, that's a very important point. And in fact, this may blow your mind, Rep., but my people come from the South. And I don't know of any household in my family as a genealogist over generations that did not own serious weaponry. Why? Because they could only trust themselves when law enforcement often was part of the KKK, when there was no support from any other corners of society. They had to protect themselves, their families, their property, their home, and they were proud gun owners. So you have there's no shade coming from me from that perspective at all. Historically, it makes sense.
Gentlemen, our time is limited, so Representative Bernstine, move us on to bump stocks, please.
Sure. So I'll share with you what a bump stock is. It is basically, it replaces the butt or the stock piece of typically the AR-15, in which it can bounce on your shoulder and shoot in a different way. It is still pulling the trigger one time in order to fire the bullets. What I would tell you is this.
So what's the difference, Representative Bernstine? Can a bump stock fire rounds faster than the gun in its original condition before the modification?
So potentially, the issue is they're very, very, very difficult to use. They are not effective. They are not effective firearms. Really, it's very few people that have even ever purchased them or used them, like them. There's really not much use to them. I don't think they should be banned. There's no reason for that because they're not even effective in any way, shape, or form. But it's really primarily a non-issue. It's just not much of a thing that we hear about.
So how often, it sounds like bump stocks are not often discovered in the commission of crimes. Is that what you're saying, Representative?
That's correct. I mean, I can tell you, I've shot them a couple times, and there's really no value to them whatsoever. Mm-hmm. You have no control over where the actual bullet goes. When I say no control, I mean zero control whatsoever. It's basically a rapid fire and spray, and it's not something that's been done really in the commission of crimes.
So, Representative Rabb, can you help us on the concept of the ghost gun? And after all, there is a bill that was approved by the House Judiciary Committee that would ban a ghost gun. And I have a hunch you're able to, not being a gun enthusiast, I bet you can still tell us what it is.
Well, basically, it's folks who are making guns themselves through 3D printers and them not being traceable. Right. And that's what law enforcement is asking. So even though it may not be, I don't know the statistics in terms of how many ghost guns have been used in the commission of a crime. I do know that law enforcement has explicitly asked for help from the legislature on this issue. And in committee, not a single Republican supported it, which is odd because they're very pro law enforcement. Yet when law enforcement asks for specific things that they need because they're seeing trends that are happening, and perhaps it's because those trends are happening in urban places, I don't know.
So here's what, and I think this is just another example of what we've seen that the Democrats have done. They put big scary names on things. They put ghost gun. Mm-hmm. They put assault weapon. They do these types of things. The truth is this: these are parts that are sometimes made of firearms, but the actual firing device itself is required to be registered during the purchase. They're firearm pieces that are made, put together, but the actual firing device itself is something that is absolutely required to be registered.
Why would there not be a reason to have serial numbers and being traceable if this is what law enforcement is asking? Why would you ignore what law enforcement is asking for? I don't understand that part.
Sure. So the piece of the firearm that is actually relevant is traceable and does have a serial number. But what we're talking about is this: every car has a serial number. but should every single headlight, do you need to report that serial number when you're registering your automobile?
But
Now,
a ghost
I think
gun
the
has
answer
no
to that is
serial
no.
number on it. Isn't that the issue, Representative Bernstine? There's no
That is
serial
not.
number on a ghost
Yeah.
gun.
Correct. So just to be clear, an entire firearm cannot be made at home. You have to be able to, if so, that is already illegal. The actual or the device that is used to fire the weapon itself must be registered and does in fact have a serial number. If it doesn't, that is already illegal.
Gentlemen, let's pause and let's take a phone call. Representative Rabb, let's yield to a caller. I'd like to get our viewers involved as soon as I can. So let's hear from Stanley from Erie. Go ahead, please.
Hello. I just have a comment about the anti-gun people, the nomenclature they use. It seems they don't understand anything all about guns. For instance, I was watching the show The View, and the one woman on there said, well, you don't want to use an AR-15 for deer hunting because if you shot the deer, it would be, you couldn't eat it because she thinks it would be like exploded. Well, it just puts one little hole. An AR-15 isn't like a bazooka. And the Democratic representative on there right now said when the Second Amendment was written, they didn't have bullets. Well, what does he think came out the end of the gun? As a matter of fact, back in those days, the caliber or the diameter was like 68 caliber, like the diameter of a nickel. AR-15 is a 22 caliber, which is smaller than the diameter of a pencil. And so these anti-gun people, they should learn what they're speaking about.
Representative Rabb, do you want to revisit that comment you made earlier?
I think we're missing the point. I don't watch The View. I don't care to watch it. I do not pretend to be a gun expert.
You said bullets didn't exist at a certain point in time. That's what the caller's challenging.
Well, I think he was challenging a number of things. But I think the bigger issue is when we talk about the Second Amendment, it was for the militia. As for AR-15s versus muskets, those are radically different weapons. And if we are going to legislate, we have to legislate as though we're in the 21st century, not in the 18th century. I think that's very important. And also the underlying point is, how do we keep people safer? We have the most guns. We have more guns than human beings in the United States, and we are the least safe industrialized nation in the world. So what are we planning to do about it? That's the part that I never hear conservatives talk about, because more guns has not kept us safer.
Go ahead, Representative Bernstine.
Well, here's what we know. And if you just look at it statistically, we look at places like Chicago, we look at the issues in New York City, you look at some of these places in California that have extreme rules and stringent barriers to firearm ownership. Well, all that's doing is harming those law-abiding citizens. And those that are going to continue to break laws are going to continue to break laws. And then they're using those firearms against law-abiding citizens. If gun control was so great, Chicago would be a safe place. Unfortunately, it's not.
Gentlemen, as you know, medical marijuana users cannot own or possess a gun. And of course, you know that Governor Josh Shapiro is supporting the legalization of recreational marijuana. So it sounds like that point of gun ownership will have to be addressed again.
Absolutely. There are disparities between state law and federal law. And so right now, if you are a law-abiding gun owner, and you choose to become a medical cannabis patient, there is no, the state does not tell you that you can get in trouble. So this is an issue where Rep. Bernstine and I are shoulder to shoulder on. If you do everything right, you should not be punished. And if you are a law-abiding gun owner, why can't you be a medical cannabis patient too? You're allowed to drink alcohol. You're allowed to smoke cigars. You're allowed to do whatever. Well, why would you not be able, if you're doing it for your health, why should that have any bearing on your ability to lawfully possess and acquire more guns? There are going to be a lot of people on the calls listening like, is he saying what I thought? Listen, you should buy as many guns as you want. As long as it's legal, you should do it. I don't have a problem with that. I want law-abiding gun owners to be responsible. But I do not want them to be discriminated against because that they become medical cannabis patients. I'm a medical cannabis patient, and I'm under threat every time I leave my home because when I drive, state troopers believe that just me ingesting a single drop of cannabis tincture a month ago makes me impaired to drive. So
Yeah,
this is something that addresses a lot of people from a lot of different corners of society.
Yeah, and what Representative Rabb just said, first off, number one, I'm not in favor of recreational marijuana, but number two, specifically on the medical end, I think it needs fixed, and it needs fixed now. My greatest concern is that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania does not have the authority and the ability to do that. I believe that needs to be done at the federal level. I have advocated for that to be done at the federal level. And what I mean by that is this, that if you are a medical marijuana patient, that under no circumstances should you lose your right to carry a firearm, own a firearm, or even possess a firearm. And that's one of those things that Representative Rabb and I are in full agreement on. The problem is this, that I think it doesn't matter what we do in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania because federal law is very clear on purchasing firearms and doing those types of things if it has to do with the control of the substance of marijuana itself. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm hopeful that the federal government takes this up. But sometimes if you think that things move slow in Harrisburg, they move really slow at the federal level. But I know that that's something that both Representative and I agree on.
Gentlemen, what does the future hold for the bills that were recently approved by the House Judiciary Committee? And we've discussed a lot of them here today. What's the next step?
Well, I think, did you want to go, Chris? Go.
No, go for it.
Yeah, so I think this, right? Now that the quote unquote leaky roof has been fixed and the speaker will let us come back, by the way, that has to do with the fact that now that the Democrats have their person in place, that we will now be able to actually vote on issues. Here's what I would tell you, that I believe strongly that the Democrats do not have the votes in order to pass these from their own members themselves. And I think that they're probably dead on arrival in the House. There may be one or two that they're able to get through. I believe the Senate will stop it. Nothing will happen. But here's where I think is important. That there's an opportunity to work on these types of issues. There's an opportunity to do it in a bipartisan way. But here's what it's going to take. It's typically going to take those and Representative Rabb and I have worked together on several things. One of the things is we are in hardcore agreement on these special elections that are going on and how terrible they are, right? And like I said from the beginning, I'm from the far right of our Republican Party. Chris is from the pretty far left of the Democrat Party. I think there's an opportunity to try to work on some things collectively together in order to make sure we're protecting law-abiding citizens. And that's one of those things that I think that we should be working on as we move forward.
Representative Rabb, since you're in the majority, I'm going to give you the last word on the future of these pending gun bills.
I hate to end this way, but Rep. Bernstine is right. No, it's tough because the Democratic Party is not an ideological monolith. The House Democratic Caucus has a lot of diversity of opinion on issues. We represent not just urban areas, but suburban and some rural areas. And for that reason, there is not unanimity of thought around this. And so there's some bills that may not pass the House, even though we have a 1-2 vote majority. But they're dead on arrival in the Senate.
Our guests have been Representative Aaron Bernstine and Representative Chris Rabb. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
PCN's Francine Schertzer talked to Representative Jill Cooper about holding back lawmakers' pay if a state budget isn't approved on time.
We're joined today by State Representative Jill Cooper. You're sponsoring legislation that would require lawmakers to forego their pay during a budget impasse. What prompted you to sponsor this bill?
Thank you for having me, Francine. What prompted me to sponsor this bill is I came from the business sector, if you will, into the House as a freshman. And it's frustrating to me to see government not move at the speed of business. And I remember, when I wasn't in the legislature saying, why can't they get anything done? And so it was almost comical when I thought to myself, we can't even pass a budget. We are, that's our job, right? To budget. We are full-time legislature. And, should be our priority. It shouldn't be an option. So for me, I was sitting back thinking, what can I do about that? And I thought as a way to motivate us to work at the speed of business and move faster, that if we don't get paid until the budget's passed, that could help us, move in a direction that is quicker and makes us more efficient to look at things prior to it coming up, and just saying, we're just going to keep going on and hold people hostage down the road. So that was the motivation, was really to make us move at the speed of business, and to do the job that the people sent us here to do.
Last year, during the budget impasse, you were one of 12 lawmakers that didn't cash a paycheck. Can you talk a little bit about what the sentiment was like among your colleagues when you and a handful of others decided not to cash their checks and others did?
Yeah, I think it was everybody's personal decision at that time. Some people may have made promises to their home district. And so, there's two schools of thought there. Some people, feel like, we should not do that. So they took their pay. The handful of legislators that did decided to, take a stand. And that's sort of where the camp I fell in. And I was glad to see that it was a bipartisan effort as well. It wasn't just one party versus the other.
How did your bill define what an impasse is?
Yeah, so this is where it gets a little tricky. My bill says that once the appropriations bill is passed, then we are considered out of an impasse. As you know, you have your fiscal code, your education code, a number of other codes that can go along into the budget when you're saying the budget is totally and completely complete. The appropriation portion of the budget is the only thing that is required every year to be passed. And so as a way to alleviate confusion, because some people felt like it was passed, after the appropriation bill, some people felt like it wasn't because some of the fiscal codes or education codes were not passed. I felt that in talking to the lawyers and writing this legislation, that was the best trigger point. And so that covers the vast majority of the budget. And that's why we chose that portion for the bill 1935. So the appropriation bill is what we have as the trigger.
Have you heard any objections for other lawmakers who perhaps don't have a second income or rely on their lawmaker pay to support their families?
Yes, I mean, there are folks who, we're sensitive to that, and that's why, some people just make the commitment on their own. I know that, I can continue to make that a commitment on my own here in District 55, but other folks, if you just do it singularly, it doesn't move the ball forward. And so for me, I felt like this was a way to have all of us on the same page, focused on doing our job, which is to pass a budget. And so that's why I said, it's not like you will not get paid. It's suspended until we do our job. And so that's the law of Pennsylvania as well. But, I hope that folks can understand that this is something that the people want. I can tell you in my district, the response has been very positive. I've done other interviews. I've received calls from across the state. People want us to be effective, and they're discouraged with government not getting things done. And I think that this helps give them some confidence. And to me, people should have confidence in their government, which will encourage them to vote. And so to me, I look at this as a way to provide confidence to the people of Pennsylvania that we are here to do our job like we said we would. And if we aren't doing it, we won't get paid until we do. And so I feel strongly about it, which is why I introduced the legislation.
Can you talk about whether similar legislation exists in other states, and perhaps if there's any evidence that such a bill would create a greater sense of urgency to get things done in the legislature?
You know what? I really did not research other states. I know that previous here in Pennsylvania, people have proposed this, and it has not gone anywhere. I can tell you that a number of people have asked me to get our federal side of the government to move along on this direction, right? To not get paid unless they pass the budget. And so I really feel that this is something that's easy to do, something that will make a difference for folks at home. It puts us with skin in the game when we're working on this issue and not delaying and, forcing us to do our job, be in Harrisburg, pass the bill, pass the budget, which is what we're supposed to do.
How do you convince your colleagues in the House to pass such a bill which could potentially negatively affect them?
Yeah, that is the challenge. And so I keep talking to people about it and telling them how much it resonates with the folks at home. I think that people respect that and they want you to get something done. And so, more folks have considered it and, trying to get it passed out of the state government committee or the appropriations committee is something that I continue to work on. I have a Democrat who signed on to this bill with me so that we can work both sides of the aisles. It's not one issue. It's not a nonpartisan issue. It's a bipartisan issue. And so I'm glad that he's joined me in the legislation so he can work with his colleagues. I can work with mine and try to move this forward. I feel like we have been sent to Harrisburg. This is our priority. Again, it's not an option, and we should be able to do our job as full-time legislators to do this. So I keep encouraging folks to do it. And so I would encourage your viewers, if they're watching this, to call their legislator in the House and say, please co-sponsor Jill's bill, 1935, no budget, no pay. I want you to work for us and I want you to get it done in a timely fashion so that like this past budget, we, held certain groups hostage, so to speak. And, we should be able to feel the same pain that we do to others here in the state. So I would encourage your viewers to call and ask them to pass and co-sponsor Bill 1935, no budget, no pay.
Representative Jill Cooper, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate your time.
A reminder about Wednesday on the issues has candidates running in April's primary election. First at 6 p.m., Craig Williams for PA Attorney General. Then at 6:30, Malcolm Kenyatta for Auditor General. At 7 o'clock, Mark Pinsley, also for Auditor General. Then at 7:30, Rick Copeland for Congress in District 10. That's tomorrow evening. And that's it for the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.